All right, guys, what's going on? It's Kevin Yates. So I want to share with you today 5 of the most common deadlift exercise mistakes that I see and what to do to correct them. So one of the most common things that I see is hips moving forward on a deadlift. So where it'll usually happen is on the descent, on the way down. So hopefully we get all this in the camera here. But so say we're using our barbell and we go through that deadlift. So what you'll see coming down is the hips will just get pulled forward. It'll kind of look something like this on the way down. So you'll see the weight starts to shift forward, hips start to move forward, and it becomes a problem because your whole center of gravity moves forward. You lose strength on the lift, and it leads to a lot of low back problems because you're going to tend to round out that low back as well. All right, so quick fix for that is really being able to drive your hips back. Once you hit that descent, you want to drive your hips, actively drive them back and stay on those heels. Now, if you have any problems doing that, sometimes like with a barbell, the weight of the bar is too much for people to overcome, so they get pulled forward. They can't get back. Sometimes it's an awareness thing, right, where you can just cue awareness and the hips will move where they need to go. But other times it could be a tightness issue. So tightness of the hamstrings, one of the most common things that you'll see and common occurrences when that happens. So if there's tight hamstrings that are an issue, some mobility reinforcement often helps. Also, a variation to use if somebody just can't or you can't stay back on your heels during that deadlift is to use dumbbells. Because with dumbbells, you have them at your sides and you eliminate that forward pull that a barbell will often provide. So you can work on just getting really good technique down, work on actively getting the hips down and back when you're holding dumbbells and perfect that technique. Okay, so that's the first mistake. And the second one is overactivation of the hamstrings. So again, this one you'll see this a lot on the initial lift off as well as when you're descending down to the deadlift. So what it'll look like is when somebody goes to lift off, right, or you lift that bar off, the hips will, the first thing you'll see is the hips will tuck right under. They'll tuck right under. And that's a classic sign of overactivation of the hamstrings. A lot of times the reason that it happens is because of weakness in the hip extensors, so the glutes. All right, so you'll see the overactive hamstrings, but again, a lot of problems occur with overactive hamstrings and weakness in the hips. That's where a lot of hamstring injuries happen. Okay, the third one we've got is lower back, right? So when doing deadlifts, the main target should be on strengthening the hip extensors and minimizing, even though the low back is involved in it, you don't want it to be the main area of emphasis. So I see so many people overactivating, overcompensating by using the lower back, just hyperextending with that back. And a lot of times what you'll see is like all the way up at the top, so I'll grab my bar again, and then when they finish all the way at the top, they'll kind of be up here, but you see how like my butt's back right now and I have this exaggerated, you know, my chest is like way up and I have this exaggerated spinal extension, right? That's a lot of times what you'll see instead of seeing straight hips and then locking that out, right, with full hip extension. Okay, so that lower back, remember when you overcompensate with it all the time, your lower back isn't meant to be taking that kind of strain and stress all the time. Okay, so that's the third one. Fourth one we've got is obviously when the knees extend before the hips, right? So you'll see, or the knees will extend and the hips will rise, so the knees will start to straighten, the hips will start to come up, but the trunk isn't moving at all, right? So that's a classic way to overemphasize the quadriceps, and then the low back has to do all the work on the lift, right? And again, the problem is most of the time it's weakness of the hip extensors. Okay, and then lastly is head position, something that we don't think a lot about. But interestingly enough, your body has its own built-in response to your head position. So what will happen is something called a pelvic ocular response. Basically, it's just a bunch of scientific mumbo-jumbo terms that have to do with your hips changing position depending on where eye level is for you. So for example, if you deadlift with your head. So if you're going to come up and you have the head up position, right? The big response that'll happen is with your head way up high, then your hips are going to tend to, remember we just talked about that exaggerated butt back position? That's what you'll tend to see, and a lot of strain will go to the low back. The reason why this happens is because when your head's up here, the only way to bring things down, your head to eye level, right, and bring your view in front of you, is to drive the hips back here, right? So there's a lot of low back and extension bias and problems with there. The other one is if you have your head down all the time. So if you look and your head's exaggerated down, well, the normal response from your hips then is to tuck under to raise your head position, to raise everything up to eye level, okay? So those are the things, and when you tuck those hips under, again, you get in this position, you try and squat down, this is what's going to happen. Low back's going to have a lot of strain, bad position for you to be in, overactive hamstrings, even knee problems because your whole center of gravity will shift. So that leads to a whole host of problems when doing deadlifts, even squats, all right? So those are your 5 deadlift exercise technique mistakes and some quick fixes that you can use. So feel free to leave me a comment right here on the blog below and let me know what you think. Talk to you next time.